This content discusses real historical events involving the deaths of children. We present these accounts with profound respect for those who suffered, died, and were left behind. This is not entertainment. This is testimony. This episode contains detailed descriptions of violence and the deaths of minors. The details included serve understanding, not sensationalism, but they are deeply disturbing. If this content may be harmful to you, please prioritize your well-being and care for yourself first. What would you do if your child begged you to let them buy ice cream from the cheerful man in the white truck, and you knew, with absolute certainty, that saying yes might be the last decision you ever made? Welcome to this journey into one of the most chilling cases of predatory evil in American history. But before we descend into the twisted psychology of a killer who weaponized childhood joy itself, I need you to ask yourself, how well do you really know the people who enter your children's lives? The smiling coach, the friendly neighbor, the ice cream vendor who knows every child's name and favorite flavor. Tell us where you're watching from right now, and whether you believe monsters announce themselves, because by the end of this account, you'll understand that the most dangerous predators are the ones who make children laugh while leading them to slaughter. In the archives of the Cincinnati Police Department, there exists a collection of evidence that shouldn't exist: 17 recordings of children's laughter, captured on a tape recorder found in a false panel beneath a freezer where ice cream should have been. 17 voices, laughing and chatting with someone they trusted. 17 children who never came home. The last recording cuts off mid-giggle, replaced by a sound investigators refused to describe in their official reports, noting only, "Content too disturbing for transcription." What you're about to discover is a mystery that paralyzed the Midwest for nearly 3 years, where one man's calculated performance of kindness concealed a hunger so monstrous that entire communities still bear the scars, where the sound of ice cream truck music became a siren song of death, where trust itself became the murder weapon. This isn't just a story about a serial killer. This is an examination of how evil hides in plain sight, wearing a smile and offering treats to children who never stood a chance. It was the summer of 1989. The Cold War was ending, the Berlin Wall would fall by November, and across America, parents were beginning to believe the world was finally becoming safer. But in the working-class neighborhoods stretching from Cincinnati, Ohio, through northern Kentucky and into southern Indiana, safety was an illusion about to shatter. That summer, the music would start playing. The tri-state area, that sprawling region where Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana blur together along the banks of the Ohio River, has always been a landscape of in-between spaces. Not quite north, not quite south, not quite urban, not quite rural. These are neighborhoods of modest homes with chain-link fences, where kids still play in the streets until the streetlights flicker on, where everybody knows everybody, where the ice cream truck's arrival is the highlight of a long, hot afternoon. In the summer of 1989, the heat came early and stayed late. By June, temperatures were pushing into the 90s, that thick, humid heat that turns the air into something you have to push through, that makes asphalt soft and tempers short. The kind of heat that sends children running toward any promise of something cold and sweet. The truck appeared first in Northside, a working-class Cincinnati neighborhood of narrow streets and tired houses where generations of families had worked in the factories along the river. It was perfect, a gleaming white Chevrolet step van, painted with bright murals of ice cream cones and smiling cartoon characters. Not new enough to seem out of place, not old enough to seem suspicious, just right, exactly calculated to be exactly right. The man who drove it was perfect too, middle-aged but energetic, friendly but not overly so. He knew to wave at the mothers watching from porches, knew to move slowly through streets where children played, knew to keep his prices reasonable, 50 cents for a popsicle, $1 for an ice cream sandwich, $1.50 for the premium items. Knew all the things a real ice cream vendor would know, because he had been one, once, before something inside him had twisted into a hunger that ice cream couldn't satisfy. His name was Thomas Edward Kern, 37 years old in the summer of 1989, divorced, no children of his own. Lived alone in a rented house on the Indiana side of the river, in Lawrenceburg, a town small enough that people didn't ask too many questions about a quiet man who kept to himself. Worked winters as a maintenance man at a roller rink. Summers, he drove his ice cream truck through neighborhoods where no one knew his real name, because the sign on his truck said, Mr. Freeze Ice Cream Delights. And that's what the children called him, Mr. Freeze, their friend, the smiling man who always remembered their favorites. But there was something else about Thomas Edward Kern, something the children couldn't have known, something even their parents wouldn't discover until it was far too late. He had been watching, learning, preparing. For nearly 2 years before that summer, he had been driving those routes, memorizing the rhythms of family life, noting which children walked home alone, which parents worked late shifts, which streets had the fewest watchful eyes. He had been patient in a way that spoke to careful planning, methodical obsession, the kind of patience that separates the opportunistic predator from the calculating one. And he had been practicing. That's what the investigators would later discover, buried in journals hidden in the walls of his house, pages and pages of observations, sketches, timelines. Practice runs. The boy in the red shirt always comes out at 4:15. The girl with braids is usually alone on Thursdays. Mother works second shift window of opportunity 2 hours. Clinical, detached, scientific in its precision, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. In June of 1989, Thomas Edward Kern was just Mr. Freeze, the friendly ice cream man, and the children loved him. The first to vanish was Christopher Ryan Mitchell, 9 years old, freckled face, gap, toothed smile, obsessed with baseball cards and his beloved Cincinnati Reds. Christopher lived with his mother, Diana, a single parent working double shifts as a nurse at Good Samaritan Hospital, and his grandmother, who watched him during the long summer days while Diana worked. Christopher was a good kid, everyone said so. Responsible for his age, knew to stay on their block. Knew not to talk to strangers, though in 1989, the concept of stranger danger was just beginning to enter the American consciousness. Not yet the constant drumbeat of paranoia it would become. And besides, Mr. Freeze wasn't a stranger. He'd been coming around for months. Christopher had bought ice cream from him at least a dozen times, always the same thing, a red, white, and blue popsicle shaped like a rocket. Mr. Freeze always remembered, always had one ready when he saw Christopher running toward the truck. It was June 7th, 1989, a Wednesday. Temperature hit 90, 3 degrees by 2 in the afternoon. Christopher's grandmother had given him $1 and strict instructions. Buy your popsicle and come straight back. The ice cream truck was parked just 3 houses down. She could see it from the porch, could hear the cheerful melody of Turkey in the Straw, playing from its speakers, tinny and bright. Christopher ran down the sidewalk, dollar clutched in his hand, toward the cluster of neighborhood kids already surrounding the truck. His grandmother watched him get in line, watched him reach the window, watched him hand over his dollar, watched Mr. Freeze's hand reach out to take it, watched him smile and say something that made Christopher laugh. Then she turned away, just for a moment, just long enough to grab the laundry basket from inside the house. When she looked back, maybe 90 seconds later, the truck was pulling away, the music fading down the street. The other children were walking back to their yards, unwrapping their treats. Christopher wasn't among them. He must have walked around the block, she thought, must have gone to trade baseball cards with the Stewart boy. She wasn't worried. Not yet. This was 1989. Children still had freedom, still roamed, still lived in a world where the worst thing that could happen was a scraped knee or a broken toy. By 4 o'clock, she was concerned. By 5, when Diana came home for her dinner break between shifts, she was frantic. By 6, they were calling neighbors. By 7, they were calling the police. By 8, when the sun was finally beginning to set and the heat was breaking into a cooler twilight, Christopher's rocket popsicle was melting in a storm drain 7 blocks away, its red, white, and blue stripes bleeding together into purple, washing away into darkness. Christopher Mitchell was already 20 miles away, in a basement he would never leave alive, with a man who had stopped being Mr. Freeze the moment the truck's doors closed and had become something else entirely, something without a name, something without mercy. The Cincinnati Police Department classified Christopher as a runaway, a family dispute, they suggested. A boy upset about something, acting out, probably hiding at a friend's house and too embarrassed to come home. They took a report, they filed it. They told Diana Mitchell that 98% of missing children return home within 72 hours. Christopher Mitchell wasn't part of that 98%. The second disappeared 19 days later. June 26th, a Tuesday afternoon, even hotter than before, the kind of heat that makes people desperate for relief. Kayla Marie Jensen, 7 years old, blonde pigtails tied with pink ribbons, loved drawing, especially unicorns, dreamed of being a veterinarian, lived in Covington, Kentucky, just across the river from Cincinnati, in a neighborhood of small houses crowded close together where everyone looked out for everyone else's children. Or thought they did. Kayla had been playing in her front yard with her younger sister, Emma, while their father worked on his car in the driveway and their mother prepared dinner inside. The ice cream truck came down the street at 4:30, right on schedule because Mr. Freeze was always punctual, always reliable, one of the things that made him seem so trustworthy. "Dad, can we get ice cream?" Kayla had asked, using her most persuasive voice, the one that usually worked. Her father, Mark Jensen, barely looked up from the engine. "You got money. I've got birthday money. Go ask your mom first." Kayla ran inside. Her mother, Sarah, was on the phone with her sister, distracted, harried by the heat and the stress of making dinner. She waved permission, shooed Kayla away, turned back to her conversation. Normal, mundane. The kind of moment that happens in millions of homes every day, meaning nothing at the time, meaning everything in retrospect. Kayla ran back outside, clutched her dollar, started toward the truck. Her little sister Emma, only 4, began to follow, but Mark called her back. "Emma, stay here. Help me hold this wrench." A father's casual decision made without thought that would save one daughter's life. Kayla reached the truck alone. She was the only customer at that moment. The other neighborhood kids were still inside, begging their parents for money, checking piggy banks, searching couch cushions for quarters. Just Kayla, standing on her tiptoes to reach the window, where Mr. Freeze smiled down at her with practiced warmth. "Well, hello there, sweetheart. Hot enough for you?" Kayla giggled. "It's super hot. Can I have a strawberry shortcake ice cream bar, please?" "You certainly can, but you know what? I just ran out of strawberry shortcake. but I have something even better in the back freezer. A brand new flavor strawberry unicorn swirl. Want to see?" Mark Jensen, still bent over his engine, heard his daughter's delighted squeal. A unicorn, really? He heard the truck door open. Heard Kayla's footsteps on the metal steps. Heard her voice, muffled now, inside the truck. "Wow, you have so many." He heard the door close. He didn't hear it open again. The truck's music started up. Pop goes the weasel. This time mechanical and merry. And it pulled away down the street, unhurried, perfectly normal, just another ice cream vendor finishing his route. Mark Jensen stood up, wiping grease from his hands, looking for Kayla to come skipping back with her treat. He saw an empty sidewalk, saw the truck turning the corner 2 blocks down, saw nothing else. Kayla. He walked to the street. "Kayla." Sarah Jensen appeared in the doorway, alerted by the tone in her husband's voice, that particular frequency of fear that every parent knows but hopes never to hear. "What's wrong? Where's Kayla? She went to get ice cream. She was right there." They ran down the street, calling her name. Knocked on neighbors' doors. Searched yards and alleys. Called the police within 15 minutes, their panic overriding the usual reassurances that children just wander, just lose track of time, Kayla Marie Jensen never came home. The unicorn ice cream didn't exist. The back of the truck didn't contain extra freezers. It contained a compartment, soundproofed, lockable from the outside, just large enough for a child. Just large enough for the worst thing imaginable. But this is where the story takes its first dark turn, where pattern begins to emerge from what authorities still wanted to believe was coincidence. Because the Cincinnati and Covington police departments didn't talk to each other, not systematically. Not in 1989, before integrated databases and multi-jurisdictional task forces became standard. Christopher Mitchell's disappearance was a Cincinnati case. Kayla Jensen's was in Kentucky. Different states. Different systems. Different files. Diana Mitchell, Christopher's mother, did what any mother would do. She made flyers. She called news stations. She walked neighborhoods asking questions, showing her son's picture to anyone who would look. And in her desperation and grief, she asked everyone the same questions. Did you see anything? Did you notice anyone unusual? Anyone hanging around? 3 people mentioned an ice cream truck. There was an ice cream man that day, one neighbor recalled, but he's been around all summer. Seems nice enough. The kids love him. Diana mentioned this to the detective assigned to Christopher's case. The detective, a 20-year veteran named Robert Halloran, who had seen enough missing children cases to be deeply cynical about happy endings, wrote it down but didn't pursue it. Ice cream trucks were everywhere in summer. Correlation wasn't causation, and the man driving the truck was a local vendor, had been around for months, had all the proper permits. Checked out, nothing suspicious, except he hadn't checked out, because the permits Thomas Edward Kern had obtained were fraudulent, expertly forged, but fraudulent nonetheless. The business license was fake. The health department inspection certificates were fake. The insurance documents were fake. Everything was performance, carefully constructed, designed to create the appearance of legitimacy without the vulnerability of actual oversight. But no one checked, not carefully, not yet. Meanwhile, in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, in a modest house on a quiet street where Thomas Edward Kern lived alone, a basement room was being prepared for its 3rd guest. Melissa Ann Kincaid disappeared on July 14th, 10 years old, lived in Newport, Kentucky, loved reading, especially fairy tales. Wanted to be a teacher when she grew up. Was responsible, careful, the kind of child parents trusted to walk to the corner store alone. Brandon Paul Simmons vanished on July 28th. 8 years old, from Cincinnati's East End, collected action figures. Never met a stranger. Outgoing, trusting, exactly the kind of child predators instinctively recognize as vulnerable. Ashley Dawn Cooper, only 6 years old, disappeared August 9th from Norwood, Ohio. Shy, sweet, terrified of the dark, but not of the friendly ice cream man who always gave her extra sprinkles. Ryan Jeffrey Mills, 9 years old, gone August 24th from St. Bernard, Ohio. Star of his Little League team. Dreamed of playing for the Reds someday. His mother had said yes to ice cream. Had watched him run to the truck. Had looked away for just a moment to check on something on the stove. Had looked back to an empty street. By the end of August 1989, 7 children had disappeared from the tri-state area. 7 families were living in a hell that has no adequate description. 7 investigations were underway, scattered across 3 states, 7 different police departments. No one seeing the pattern because no one was looking at all the pieces together. But one person was beginning to see. Her name was Detective Sarah Chen, a relatively new detective in the Cincinnati Police Department's Crimes Against Children Unit. 31 years old, Princeton graduate, former social worker, who'd joined the force after seeing too many cases fall through systemic cracks. She had the Christopher Mitchell case, had been assigned it when the more senior detectives wrote it off as a probable runaway. Sarah Chen didn't think Christopher Mitchell ran away. She'd interviewed his mother, his grandmother, his teachers, his friends. Had seen the baseball card collection meticulously organized in binders. Had read the essay Christopher wrote for school about wanting to be like his mother, a nurse who helps people. Children who run away leave signs, trouble at school, behavioral changes, conflicts at home. Christopher Mitchell left none of those signs. Christopher Mitchell left only absence. So Detective Chen did something unusual for 1989. She started making calls to neighboring departments, to missing persons units in surrounding counties, just asking, "Have you had any missing children cases recently? Any that seem off?" She found Kayla Jensen's case in Covington, found Melissa Kincaid in Newport, found Brandon Simmons in her own department, classified under a different detective, found Ashley Cooper in Norwood, found Ryan Mills in St. Bernard, 7 children, 7 departments, all in 90 days, all roughly the same age range, all from working class neighborhoods, all during daylight hours, all with witnesses who saw them one moment and found them gone the next. And when Sarah Chen started asking the witnesses detailed questions, 4 of them mentioned an ice cream truck. She brought her findings to her supervisor on September 1st, 1989, laid out the timeline, the geographic cluster, the witness statements, the statistical impossibility of 7 unrelated disappearances in one metropolitan area in 3 months. Her supervisor, a lieutenant named Thomas Walsh, old school, set in his ways, was skeptical. "Ice cream trucks are everywhere in summer, Chen. You're seeing patterns where there's just coincidence." 7 children in 90 days, Lieutenant. The statistical average for this area is maybe 2 missing children per year, and most of those are custody disputes or actual runaways. This is unprecedented. Or it's a bad summer. Heat makes people crazy, makes kids reckless. These children weren't reckless. These were good kids from stable homes who vanished in broad daylight with parents nearby. Walsh sighed, the sigh of a man who'd been a cop too long, who'd learned to protect himself from hope because hope in this job was just prelude to disappointment. "What are you suggesting? We put out an APB on every ice cream vendor in the tri-state area. Create a panic over nothing. I'm suggesting we investigate, interview ice cream vendors, check permits and licenses, see if anyone stands out. With what manpower, Chen, we're understaffed as it is. I can't pull people from active cases to chase a theory. Then let me do it. My time, my initiative. Walsh studied her, saw the determination in her eyes, the thing that made her both an excellent detective and a future burnout case. Fine, but don't create a media circus. Don't scare the public, and don't get tunnel vision. Keep an open mind. Detective Sarah Chen nodded, agreed to all of it, and immediately began doing exactly what she'd planned to do regardless of permission. Hunt for the pattern within the pattern, the specific signature that would distinguish one ice cream vendor from all the others. She didn't know yet that while she was beginning her investigation, Thomas Edward Kern was already selecting his next victim. Didn't know that he'd been watching her favorite ice cream stop. A girl named Rebecca, 8 years old, who visited the truck every Tuesday like clockwork. Didn't know that the clock was ticking and that her investigation was a race against a hunger that wouldn't stop, couldn't stop, had metastasized into something beyond control. What they found next would haunt investigators for decades, because sometimes the most monstrous truth is how close we come to prevention. How many times we almost see, almost understand, almost stop the thing before it consumes another innocent life. Detective Sarah Chen started with paperwork, the boring, methodical foundation of good police work. She requested business license records from the health departments in Hamilton County, Ohio, Campbell County, Kentucky, and Dearborn County, Indiana. She got back 17 names of registered ice cream vendors operating in the tri-state area during the summer of 1989. She began calling them, interviewing them. Most were easy to verify established businesses with years of history, multiple trucks, employees, tax records, the whole infrastructure of legitimate commerce. 3 were individuals running single, truck operations, the kind of small-time entrepreneurs who bought a used truck, stocked it with wholesale ice cream, and spent their summers making modest profits from the neighborhood route. One of those 3 was listed as Freeze, Fresh Mobile Ice Cream, owned and operated by Thomas Edward Kern, with a business address in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. On paper, everything looked legitimate. Valid business license. Health department inspection passed. Liability insurance current. Even customer references. Chen called the number listed and reached a woman who effusively praised Mr. Freeze for his reliability and kindness to children. Later, they would discover that the woman was Thomas Edward Kern's ex-wife, still bitter about the divorce but willing to lie for him because he'd threatened to reveal certain details about her marriage unless she helped maintain his cover. Coercion layered upon deception, layered upon carefully constructed normalcy. But Detective Chen didn't know that yet. She scheduled an interview with Thomas Edward Kern for September 8, 1989. Just routine questions, she told him. Background for an investigation. Nothing to worry about. Thomas Edward Kern agreed immediately, his voice friendly and cooperative on the phone. Happy to help, detective. Terrible thing, these missing children. Anything I can do. They met at a Bob Evans restaurant in Cincinnati, neutral ground, public but quiet. Chen arrived early, positioned herself with a view of the entrance, watched as Kern walked in at exactly the appointed time punctual, she noted, which fit the profile building in her mind. He was medium height, maybe 5 feet 9 inches, medium build, neither heavy nor thin, brown hair beginning to gray at the temples, clean, shaven, wearing khakis and a polo shirt, the uniform of suburban American normalcy, forgettable, designed to be forgettable. But his eyes, Chen noticed his eyes immediately, and something cold touched the back of her neck, that instinct cops develop, the thing that says wrong even when everything appears right. His eyes were pale blue, almost gray, and they were assessing her with the same intensity she was assessing him. Calculating, measuring, Detective Chen. He extended his hand, she shook it, normal temperature, dry palm. Firm but not aggressive grip, everything calibrated. Thomas Kern, thanks for meeting me, can I buy you coffee? They ordered. Made small talk about the unseasonable heat, the Reds' disappointing season, the usual pleasantries that establish rapport. Chen watched him perform friendliness, watched him smile at the waitress, watched him add cream to his coffee with steady hands. Then she began asking questions. How long had he been in the ice cream business? Where did he drive his routes? Had he noticed anything unusual during his summer rounds? Any suspicious individuals? Any children who seemed distressed or frightened? Kern answered everything openly, seemingly without guile. He'd been driving the ice cream route for 2 summers, he said. Covered neighborhoods in Cincinnati, northern Kentucky, southeastern Indiana, wherever business was good. He loved children, had always wanted kids of his own, but the marriage hadn't worked out. This job let him bring a little joy to young lives, see their faces light up, hear their laughter. It was rewarding work, he said, though not exactly lucrative. I heard about those missing children, he said, his voice dropping to a tone of practiced concern. Heartbreaking. I've been watching extra carefully, you know, trying to notice if anyone's following kids or acting strange. These are dangerous times. Have you noticed anyone? Chen asked, her voice neutral, professional. No, unfortunately. I wish I had. I wish I could help those families. He paused, took a sip of coffee. Do you have any leads? We're pursuing several avenues. Chen said, giving nothing away. Can you tell me about your routes, specific neighborhoods? Kern rattled off street names: Northside, East End, Norwood, St. Bernard in Ohio, Covington, Newport in Kentucky, Lawrenceburg, Aurora in Indiana. Every neighborhood where a child had disappeared. Those are fairly widespread routes, Chen observed. Long days. I like to stay busy, and kids are everywhere in summer. Good business, you know. Do you keep records of your routes, your sales? A flash of something crossed Kern's face, wariness, maybe, or calculation. Not detailed ones. Mostly just cash business, you know. Keep rough track for taxes, but nothing specific. Do you remember serving any of the missing children? Christopher Mitchell, Kayla Jensen, Melissa Kincaid. Chen was watching his face carefully, watching for expressions, the involuntary tells that liars can't fully control. Kern's face showed appropriate concern, sadness, but nothing else. No recognition, no fear. I serve hundreds of children, detective. I couldn't possibly remember everyone. If you showed me pictures, maybe, but... He shook his head sadly. I wish I could help more. They talked for 45 minutes. Chen asked about his background, his employment history, his living situation. Kern answered everything, seemingly without evasion. He'd worked various jobs: construction, maintenance, food service. Divorced, no children, lived alone. Clean record, he said, not even a speeding ticket. That last part was true. Thomas Edward Kern had never been arrested, never been convicted of anything, never appeared on any law enforcement radar. He was a ghost in the system, invisible in his ordinariness. When the interview concluded, Chen thanked him for his time, told him she'd be in touch if she had follow-up questions. Kern smiled, paid for both their coffees despite her protests, and walked out to the parking lot where his personal vehicle, a nondescript beige Ford sedan, was parked. Detective Sarah Chen sat in her booth for another 15 minutes, nursing cold coffee, processing the interview. Everything Kern had said was reasonable. His demeanor was cooperative. His answers were consistent. But that coldness at the back of her neck hadn't gone away. Something was wrong. Something she couldn't articulate, couldn't justify in a report, couldn't use as basis for a warrant or further investigation. Just instinct. Just the feeling that she'd been sitting across from a predator wearing a human mask. She drove back to the station, wrote up her interview notes, filed them with the growing case documentation, requested a background check on Thomas Edward Kern routine procedure, nothing that required special justification. The check would take weeks to come back in 1989, before computerized systems made such inquiries instantaneous. While she waited, while bureaucracy ground through its slow processes, Thomas Edward Kern drove home to Lawrenceburg, descended the stairs to his basement, and visited the room where 7 children were imprisoned in varying states of deterioration, 7 voices that had stopped screaming weeks or days or hours ago, 7 souls whose last sight on earth had been his pale blue eyes and that terrible smile. He had been careful, so careful, but now the police were asking questions. Now there was a detective, pretty, young, intelligent, who had looked at him with something like suspicion in her eyes. Now he needed to be more careful still, or, his darker instincts whispered, he needed to accelerate, finish what he'd started, complete his collection, because he could feel it coming, the ending, the inevitable conclusion when walls would close in and choices would narrow. But not yet, not quite yet. He still had time, still had freedom, still had one more route to drive. September 12, 1989. Rebecca Ann Thompson, 8 years old, with dark curls and a smile that could light up a room, ran out of her house in Norwood, Ohio, clutching $2 her grandfather had given her for getting good grades on her first report card of the year. The ice cream truck was playing The Entertainer, jaunty and bright, and Rebecca wanted a chocolate, dipped cone with rainbow sprinkles. Her mother watched from the window, saw Rebecca reach the truck, saw her talking to Mr. Freeze, animated and happy, saw Mr. Freeze gesture toward the back of the truck. "I have a special treat for good students," he would have said, his voice warm and congratulatory, saw Rebecca's excited nod, saw the door open, saw her daughter step inside, saw the door close, saw the truck pull away, music fading into the distance, carrying her child toward darkness. Rebecca's mother, Jennifer Thompson, was at the police station within 20 minutes, before panic could even fully set in, before the rational explanations could take hold. "My daughter got in an ice cream truck, and it drove away, and she didn't come out," she told the desk sergeant, her voice already climbing toward hysteria. The desk sergeant called Detective Sarah Chen. Chen arrived at the Thompson house 40 minutes later, already knowing, her stomach a knot of dread and rage, because 8 was a pattern, 8 was beyond coincidence, 8 was a serial predator, operating in plain sight, while bureaucracy and jurisdictional boundaries had allowed him to hunt unchallenged. "Describe the truck," she demanded, white, with paintings of ice cream and cartoon characters, and a sign, "Mr. Freeze Ice Cream Delights. Did you see the driver?" Not clearly, media, maged man, friendly voice. Oh God, Rebecca talked about him before. Said he was the nice ice cream man who always remembered she liked rainbow sprinkles. Chen ran to her car, grabbed the radio, put out an all-points bulletin, "White ice cream truck, Mr. Freeze Ice Cream Delights. Armed and dangerous, child abduction in progress." Every cop in the tri-state area needed to find that truck, now, before Rebecca Thompson became number 8. Before Thomas Edward Kern, somewhere on the roads between Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana, could reach his house and add Rebecca to his collection. The response was massive and immediate. Patrol cars flooded the streets. Helicopters went up. News stations interrupted regular programming with breaking alerts. Child abducted, ice cream truck. If you see this vehicle, call 911 immediately. Thomas Edward Kern heard the alerts on his radio, heard his description broadcast across every channel, knew the net was closing, made a decision. He drove to a shopping center parking lot in Florence, Kentucky, parked the ice cream truck in a far corner away from cameras, and walked away. Left Rebecca Thompson locked in the soundproofed compartment, terrified, crying, but alive. Left evidence in the truck: his fingerprints, strands of his hair, the tape recorder with 17 voices. Left everything because speed was survival now, and the truck was a liability. He had a plan for this contingency. Had always had a plan. At his house in Lawrenceburg was a packed bag, false identification, cash, and a motorcycle fast, maneuverable, hard to track. He could be in another state by midnight, could disappear into the vast American landscape of drifters and transients and men without histories. But first there was the basement. 7 children who could identify him, who were evidence, who were loose ends. He couldn't leave them alive. That was unfathomable. That was wasteful. That was unfinished. Thomas Edward Kern drove toward his house, toward the decision that waited in his basement, toward the ending he'd always known was coming. Meanwhile, at 4:47 p.m. on September 12, 1989, a Florence, Kentucky patrol officer named David Martinez spotted a white ice cream truck parked suspiciously far from any residential areas. He approached cautiously, hand on his weapon, called for backup. The truck was unlocked. Empty in the driver's compartment, but there was a panel in the back, false wall, and behind it, Officer Martinez would later describe the moment as the worst of his 23-year career. The sound coming from behind that panel, child crying, screaming, pounding on metal. He wrenched it open and found Rebecca Thompson, alive, terrified, dehydrated but alive. 8 hours after her abduction, she was safe, but the truck contained other things too. In those first moments of relief and rescue, Officer Martinez didn't process them. It was only later, when evidence technicians processed the scene, that the full horror became clear. The tape recorder with 17 recordings, 17 voices, laughing and chatting with someone they trusted, 17 recordings that ended in sounds no child should make. Photographs, Polaroids, dozens of them, hidden in a locked box beneath the driver's seat. 7 children, recognizable from missing persons reports. 7 children in various states of terror and degradation. Evidence, testimony, proof of horrors, and a journal. Handwritten, meticulous, detailing locations, times, methods. Names of children who had survived encounters, the ones who got away, who bought ice cream and left unharmed, never knowing how close they'd come, and names of the 7 who hadn't, descriptions of what had been done to them, where they were kept, how long each had survived. The journal ended with an entry dated September 12, 1989, written that morning before Kern had begun his route. 8 is a good number. 8 is completion. After 8, I can't rest. After 8, the music can stop. By 5:15 p.m., every law enforcement officer in 3 states knew the name Thomas Edward Kern, knew his address, knew his vehicle descriptions, knew that 7 children were somewhere, likely at his residence, and that every second mattered. Detective Sarah Chen was in the first wave of vehicles that screamed toward Lawrenceburg, Indiana, sirens wailing, heart pounding, praying to gods she didn't believe in that they would arrive in time. That instinct hadn't failed her. that the 7 children photographed in those Polaroids might still draw breath. The house on Maple Street in Lawrenceburg looked like every other house on the block, modest, well maintained, utterly ordinary. The lawn was mowed, the paint was fresh, window boxes held geraniums, bright red, carefully tended. It could have been anyone's home. It was everyone's nightmare. The tactical team hit the door at 5:40, 2 p.m. Police, search warrant, come out with your hands visible. Silence, no response, no movement from within. They breached, swept through the first-floor living room, kitchen, dining room, all obsessively clean, everything in its place, the home of a man who valued control and order. Nothing disturbed, no struggle, no obvious evidence. Then they found the basement door, locked from the hallway side, heavy deadbolt, the kind of lock meant to keep people in, not out. They broke it open, descended stairs that creaked under tactical boots, entered darkness that smelled wrong, chemicals and decay and something else, something sweet and rotten that made seasoned officers gag. Detective Sarah Chen wasn't tactical, trained, wasn't supposed to enter until the scene was secured, but she couldn't wait, couldn't breathe properly until she knew. She followed the team down, flashlight cutting through darkness, and saw a workshop. That's what Thomas Edward Kern would have called it. Neat, organized, tools on pegboards, labeled and arranged by size, a workbench with projects in progress, a dollhouse, half built, incredibly detailed, a sewing machine with fabric neatly folded beside it, the hobbies of a meticulous man, a man who took pride in craftsmanship. And doors, 3 doors along the back wall, heavy, soundproofed, each with multiple locks. The tactical team opened the first door. The smell that emerged was unspeakable. Inside, a room no larger than a closet, concrete floor, drain in the center, hooks embedded in the ceiling. And remains what had once been Melissa Ann Kincaid, the 10-year-old who loved reading fairy tales. Her body had been there for 2 months in the summer heat. Despite the dehumidifier running in the corner, Kern's attempt to slow decomposition, to preserve his collection. Officers vomited. Hardened men who'd seen everything wept. Detective Chen stood paralyzed, witnessing the endpoint of evil, the physical manifestation of a hunger that consumed innocence and excreted horror. The second door contained Ashley Dawn Cooper and Brandon Paul Simmons, the 6-year-old and 8-year-old who'd disappeared in early August. They had been dead for weeks, their bodies showing signs of malnutrition, dehydration, and injuries consistent with prolonged torture. The medical examiner would later determine they'd survived in captivity for 12 to 16 days before death. The third door, Detective Chen opened it herself, hands shaking, breath coming in gasps, and found Christopher Mitchell, Kayla Jensen, and Ryan Mills. Dead, all dead. The oldest bodies, the first taken, decomposed beyond easy recognition except through dental records. 7 children, 7 families' worst fears confirmed. 7 souls who'd spent their final days in darkness and terror and pain, who'd called for parents who couldn't hear them, who'd prayed for rescue that came too late. But there were 8 on the list, 8 in the journal, 7 bodies, and Rebecca Thompson is alive. A voice crackled over Chen's radio. She's at University Hospital, dehydrated and traumatized but alive. She's going to make it. 7 murdered. 1 saved. 1 child who would grow up bearing the weight of survival, haunted by sounds from that compartment, by the knowledge that she'd been hours away from becoming number 8. The discovery reshaped humanity's philosophical relationship with the universe. At 6:17 p.m., while investigators were still processing the horror in his basement, while parents were being notified of discoveries that would destroy them, while the full weight of law Enforcement descended on Lawrenceburg. Thomas Edward Kern was 40, 3 miles away, at a rest stop along Interstate 74, standing beside his motorcycle, preparing to vanish into America. He had his bag, had his money, had identification in 3 different names, all expertly forged, had a plan that had been years in the making, safe houses, contacts in the underground of drifters and criminals, routes that avoided cameras and checkpoints. He could disappear, could become someone else, could start over in a new city with a new truck, with new neighborhoods full of trusting children. But he made one final mistake, the thing that brilliant psychopaths often do. He underestimated the mundane power of luck and ordinary observation. A truck driver named William Ross, 40, 9 years old, was parked at that same rest stop, drinking coffee, listening to the radio. Heard the breaking news about the manhunt, heard the description, white male, late 30s, medium build, driving a motorcycle, possibly fleeing toward the Indiana-Illinois border. William Ross looked across the parking lot and saw a man matching that description. Exactly that description, standing beside a motorcycle, wearing a backpack, checking a map. Ross wasn't a hero, wasn't trained for confrontation, was just a decent man who believed in doing the right thing, even when the right thing was terrifying. He walked to the rest stop building, found a payphone, called 911. "I think I'm looking at your guy, the ice cream truck killer. He's right here." Illinois State Police arrived in 6 minutes, found Thomas Edward Kern still at that rest stop, still preparing, still believing he had time. They boxed him in with 3 patrol cars, officers emerging with weapons drawn, shouting commands. For a moment, witnesses would later describe this moment in consistent detail. Thomas Edward Kern looked around at the converging police, at the impossibility of escape, and smiled. Not the friendly smile of Mr. Freeze, not the practiced warmth of a man who sold ice cream to children, but something else, something that revealed the truth beneath the performance. A smile of satisfaction, of completion, of a man who had done what he came to do and accepted the consequences without regret. On the ground, hands behind your head, now, he complied, didn't resist. Lay down on the hot asphalt of the rest stop, hands behind his head, that smile still on his face, and waited while they cuffed him, read him his rights, loaded him into the back of a patrol car. Thomas Edward Kern was arrested at 6:40, 1 p.m. on September 12, 1980. 9:80, 3 days after his first murder, hours after his last abduction, weeks before he'd planned to flee, caught by coincidence and conscience and the ordinary vigilance of a truck driver named William Ross, who made a phone call. The trial began on March 5, 1990, Hamilton County, Ohio, because that's where Christopher Mitchell had been taken, where the first murder had occurred, where jurisdiction was clearest despite the multi-state nature of Kern's hunting grounds. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Margaret Winters, a veteran of child abuse cases who had seen terrible things but nothing that prepared her for the evidence in this case. She built her argument with meticulous precision. Timeline, evidence, testimony, a structure designed to lead the jury inexorably toward the only possible verdict. The defense, court-appointed because Kern had no money for private attorneys, attempted the only strategy available: insanity. Their argument was that no sane person could commit these acts, that Thomas Edward Kern was clearly suffering from severe mental illness, that he belonged in a psychiatric facility, not on death row. The prosecution countered with Kern's own journal, his own words, which demonstrated clear premeditation, careful planning, awareness of right and wrong, and deliberate efforts to conceal his crimes, all indicators of legal sanity regardless of moral depravity. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The testimony was devastating. Medical examiners described injuries in clinical language that couldn't disguise horror. Parents testified about their children, who they were, what they loved, what they'd never get to become. Detective Sarah Chen walked the jury through the investigation, through the moment she'd known something was wrong, through the basement and what waited there. And Rebecca Thompson, 9 years old by then, the only survivor, testified in closed court with victim advocates beside her. She described the friendly ice cream man who remembered her favorite flavor, described climbing into the truck to see the special treats, described the door closing, the darkness, the realization that something was terribly wrong, described hours in that compartment, hearing the music play above her, crying, calling for her mother, while Thomas Edward Kern drove his route as if nothing was amiss. "Did the defendant say anything to you?" The prosecutor asked gently. "He told me not to worry," Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible. "He said he was taking me somewhere special. He said all the other children were waiting." The jury heard 7 days of testimony. The defense called psychological experts who diagnosed Kern with antisocial personality disorder, severe paraphilias, detachment from reality. The prosecution called experts who confirmed that Kern knew exactly what he was doing, planned meticulously to avoid detection, and had the capacity to stop but chose not to. Thomas Edward Kern sat through all of it, expressionless, taking notes on a legal pad, occasionally conferring with his attorneys. Never testified on his own behalf. Never showed emotion except once, when they played clips from the tape recorder. Those 17 voices, those children laughing and talking, unaware they were recording their own epitaphs. Then Kern closed his eyes and smiled, that same terrible smile from the rest stop, as if savoring a pleasant memory. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, came back with verdicts on 7 counts of aggravated murder, 8 counts of kidnapping, multiple counts of sexual assault, abuse of a corpse, and other charges that together carried a maximum penalty of death by lethal injection, guilty on all counts. The sentencing phase took another week. The prosecution sought death. The defense argued for life imprisonment, citing mitigating factors: Kern's troubled childhood, history of abuse, mental illness. The jury recommended death. The judge concurred. On April 27, 1990, Thomas Edward Kern was formally sentenced to death. Asked if he had any statement, he stood, looked directly at the families in the courtroom, and said, "I'm sorry you're in pain. That was never my intention. I only wanted to make children happy, give them joy, be part of their lives. If I could go back and change things, I wouldn't, because those days, those moments, were the only times I ever felt truly alive, the only times I ever felt complete. You can kill me, but you can't erase what I am, what I did, what it meant. That will last forever." Families screamed. Security removed them from the courtroom. The judge pounded his gavel, ordered silence, remanded Thomas Edward Kern to death row at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility to await execution. What happened next defies the usual narratives of justice and closure, because sometimes the monster's death isn't the ending, and sometimes the wounds are too deep for any verdict to heal. Thomas Edward Kern spent 11 years on death row. Through appeals, legal maneuvers, stays of execution, the grinding mechanisms of capital punishment that ensure every avenue is exhausted before the state takes a life. He gave interviews to journalists, to psychologists, to anyone who would listen, always performing, always manipulating, always trying to control his narrative. He claimed remorse, claimed he was a victim of his own uncontrollable urges, claimed he wanted to die, to end his suffering, to make amends through his death. But in those same interviews, he would describe his crimes with a detail and relish that betrayed the truth he wasn't sorry. He was savoring, reliving, maintaining power over his victims by keeping their suffering alive in public consciousness. The families endured all of it, attended every hearing, opposed every appeal, waited for the justice promised to them. Diana Mitchell, Christopher's mother, became an advocate for victims' rights, for better interjurisdictional communication, for the death penalty. She testified before state legislatures, appeared on national news, used her grief as fuel for activism. Mark and Sarah Jensen, Kayla's parents, divorced 2 years after her murder. The stress, the grief, the blame they couldn't help directing at each other, destroying what the killer had left intact. Mark struggled with alcoholism, eventually achieving sobriety, but losing years to the bottle. Sarah remarried, had another daughter, and tried to build a life while carrying Kayla's absence like a second shadow. The other families followed similar trajectories. Some stayed together, some fell apart, all bore scars that never fully healed. Support groups formed, memorials were erected, scholarships established in the children's names. Attempts to create meaning from meaninglessness, to transmute tragedy into something that might honor the dead. Rebecca Thompson, the survivor, grew up under the weight of impossible survivor's guilt. Why her? Why had she been rescued when 7 others died? She required years of therapy, struggled with PTSD, night terrors, difficulty forming relationships. But she survived, graduated high school, college, became a social worker specializing in trauma therapy for children. Transformed her nightmare into purpose, used her scars to heal others. Detective Sarah Chen left the Cincinnati Police Department in 1993, unable to continue in a job that had shown her the absolute depths of human depravity. Became a private investigator specializing in cold cases, finding the missing, giving families answers. Never forgot Thomas Edward Kern, the case that haunted her, the feeling that she should have known sooner, moved faster, prevented at least some of those deaths. In 2001, after 11 years of appeals and delays, Thomas Edward Kern's execution date was finally set, June 20th, 2001. The families were invited to witness. 5 accepted Diana Mitchell, Mark Jensen, parents of Melissa Kincaid, mother of Ryan Mills, father of Ashley Cooper. Sat in the witness room at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility, watching through glass as Thomas Edward Kern was strapped to a gurney, Roman 4 lines inserted, final protocols completed. He was asked for final words. He looked directly at the glass, directly at the families, and said, "I see them every night, all 7. They visit me in my cell in my dreams. They're not angry. They understand what they meant to me. They know they'll live forever through me. Even after I'm gone, I'll be part of them, and they'll be part of me. Death isn't the end. It's just another door." Then he smiled. That terrible smile, one last time, the lethal chemicals flowed, his body convulsed, his breathing stopped. At 7:18 p.m. on June 20th, 2001, Thomas Edward Kern was pronounced dead. The families felt nothing, or everything, or something in between relief and emptiness and rage and grief, all tangled together. Diana Mitchell later described it. "I thought it would feel like justice. It just felt like more death. Like we were all in that basement with him, and no amount of execution could get us out." But this is where the story takes its final, unexpected turn, because death wasn't the end of Thomas Edward Kern's impact, and sometimes justice is just the beginning of a longer reckoning. 3 years after the execution, in 2004, a journalist named Ellen Graff published a book about the case, The Ice Cream Man, a chronicle of innocence destroyed. Meticulously researched, sensitively written, It became a bestseller, brought national attention to the murders, spawned documentaries, podcasts, endless media coverage, and with that attention came something the families hadn't anticipated: obsession. True crime enthusiasts who wanted to visit the sites where children had been taken. Dark tourism to Lawrenceburg, people standing outside the house on Maple Street taking photographs, making TikToks, turning tragedy into content. The house had been demolished in 1991, but the lot remained, and it became a destination for ghouls and thrill seekers. Internet forums emerged dedicated to Thomas Edward Kern. Some analyzed his psychology, some glorified him. Some horrifyingly expressed admiration, describing him as methodical, intelligent, a perfect predator. Fan mail had arrived while he was alive. Now websites archived it, discussed it, treated him as a figure of dark fascination rather than what he was: a man who tortured and murdered children. The families tried to fight it, tried to combat the narrative that turned their children into footnotes in Thomas Edward Kern's story. Diana Mitchell gave interview after interview, always steering conversation back to Christopher, who he was, what he loved, what he could have become. Tried to reclaim her son's identity from the case that had swallowed it. But the internet is forever. The fascination is endless, and somewhere, the families knew, were people who read about Thomas Edward Kern and saw not a monster but a blueprint. In 2019, 30 years after the murders, the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit released a study on serial predators who target children. Thomas Edward Kern was case study number 7. The report detailed his methodology, the use of a profession that provided access and trust, the careful selection of victims from different jurisdictions to complicate investigation, soundproofing and compartmentalization that allowed him to operate undetected. But it also detailed the failures that allowed him to operate for 3 months: lack of interagency communication, absence of centralized missing persons databases, insufficient vetting of business permits, public complacency about children's safety. The Kern case, the report concluded, had prompted significant reforms in law enforcement protocols. Those reforms came too late for 7 children, but they might have saved others, might save others still. That's what the families tell themselves, that something good came from something evil, that their children's deaths weren't meaningless. Diana Mitchell, 70, 1 years old in 2019, reflected on this in an interview. I still see Christopher everywhere, in the baseball games I watch, in the nurses at hospitals, in every 9-year-old boy with freckles and a gap-toothed smile. He'd be 40 now, might have had children of his own, might have become that doctor or that teacher or that father. Instead, he, forever 9, forever running toward an ice cream truck, forever one of the ice cream man's victims. She paused, gathered herself. But I won't let that be all he is. Christopher Ryan Mitchell was my son. He was kind. He was funny. He collected baseball cards and dreamed of playing for the Reds. He made me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day, terrible scrambled eggs and burnt toast that I ate every bite of. That's who he was. That's who they all were. Not just victims. Not just a case number. They were children. They were loved. They mattered. The house in Lawrenceburg is gone, bulldozed, the lot overgrown with grass and weeds. Neighbors wanted the entire block torn down, wanted to erase the address from maps, to pretend it had never existed. But you can't bulldoze memory, can't demolish horror once it's taken root in a community's collective consciousness. People still avoid that street. Parents still drive their children past it with locked doors and warnings not to look. The neighborhood never recovered, property values plummeted, families moved away, new residents arrived unaware and then left when they learned the history. It became a ghost block in a living city, haunted not by spirits but by knowledge of what happened there. The ice cream trucks still come to Cincinnati neighborhoods every summer, but fewer parents say yes. Fewer children are allowed to run to the truck alone. The sound of turkey in the straw, or pop goes the weasel, played through tinny speakers, still makes some people flinch, still triggers memories they'd rather forget. An entire generation of Midwest parents internalized the lesson Thomas Edward Kern taught. Trust no one with your children. Assume nothing. Watch everything. The freedom of 1980, 9 summers, when kids roamed until streetlights and ice cream trucks were sources of joy rather than fear, died with 7 children in a basement in Lawrenceburg. Rebecca Thompson, now 40, 3 years old, has never eaten ice cream since. Can't stand the taste, can't hear ice cream truck music without her hands shaking. But she has dedicated her life to helping other survivors, to being the voice for children who can't speak, to preventing other parents from experiencing what hers did. I think about them, she said in a 2020 interview. The 7 who didn't make it out, I think about what Kern said, that they'd live forever through him. I refuse to accept that. They don't live through him, they live through us, through everyone who remembers their names, who fights for children, who refuses to let evil win unopposed. That's their legacy, not him, us. The story of Thomas Edward Kern and the children he murdered remains unresolved in the ways that matter most. Not legally, he was tried, convicted, executed. Not factually, we know what he did, how he did it, why he did it in his own twisted logic. But morally, philosophically, the questions persist. Questions that each of us must answer for ourselves. How do we protect innocence in a world where monsters wear friendly faces and drive ice cream trucks? At what point does reasonable caution become paranoia that steals childhood itself? How do we balance the need for safety with the need for freedom, for joy, for the kind of trusting innocence that makes children children? And perhaps most difficult, how do we remember victims without immortalizing their killer? How do we tell these stories, these necessary, important, educational stories, without creating the dark fame that future predators might crave? The families of the 7 children have no answers. They have only their grief, their memories, and their determination that Christopher, Kayla, Melissa, Brandon, Ashley, Ryan, and Rebecca's survival won't be forgotten among the sensationalism of the case itself. To this day, on the anniversaries of the children's disappearances, families gather at a memorial in Eden Park, Cincinnati. 7 trees planted in a circle, 7 plaques with names and dates and pictures of children frozen forever young. They come together, the parents who lost, the survivor who escaped, the detective who couldn't save them all, the community that failed to see the danger in their midst. They come to remember, to grieve, to promise that these deaths mattered, that these children mattered, that the lessons learned will protect other children even though they came too late for these 7. And on certain summer evenings, when the heat rises and the fireflies emerge, when children play in yards and parents watch from porches, people claim they can still hear it, the faint sound of ice cream truck music carried on the wind, a melody that once meant joy and now means something else entirely. Most dismiss it as imagination, as the mind playing tricks in the twilight, as the echo of ordinary trucks from neighboring streets. But some know better. Some understand that certain sounds, certain fears, certain lessons are seared into a place's memory, becoming part of its landscape as surely as rivers and roads. The question isn't whether you hear the music. The question is whether you'll remember what it really means, and whether you'll stay watchful long after the sound fades into silence. If this journey through one of America's most disturbing serial predator cases has affected you, If you find yourself thinking differently about trust and safety and the masks that evil wears, then this account has served its purpose. This wasn't entertainment. This was testimony to lives cut short, to families destroyed, to a community scarred, and to the hard truth that evil rarely announces itself with violence and rage. It usually arrives smiling, offering candy, asking if you'd like to see something special in the back of the truck. If you believe these stories must be told, that remembering the victims honors them more than silence ever could, then consider subscribing to this channel. Every case we explore here is treated with the same respect, the same commitment to truth, the same refusal to sensationalize suffering. Leave a like if this account reminded you that vigilance isn't paranoia, it's responsibility, that teaching children about danger isn't stealing their innocence, it's protecting it. And in the comments, I want to know, how do we balance childhood freedom with childhood safety? How do we teach children to trust the good while recognizing the evil? How do we honor victims without glorifying their killers? These aren't easy questions. They don't have simple answers. But they're conversations we must have. Until next time, remember Christopher Ryan Mitchell, Kayla Marie Jensen, Melissa Ann Kincaid, Brandon Paul Simmons, Ashley Dawn Cooper, Ryan Jeffrey Mills, and the seventh child whose name has been kept private by family request. Remember them not as statistics in a serial killer's count, but as children who deserved to grow up, who deserved to become whoever they might have been, who deserved better than they got. And remember that the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones in nightmares. They're the ones driving past your house playing cheerful music, the ones who know your children's names and favorite flavors, the ones who smile and wave and seem so very, very normal. The darkness we should fear most is the kind that hides in plain sight, wearing a friendly face, offering ice cream on a hot summer day.